returning to the Australian Open. I'm delighted to say Jenny Claffey is here with us to offer some analysis of the actual tennis itself. Jenny, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, guys. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Let's start with Andy Murray, the story of the morning so far, winning a 5-set match 3 years, did he say, after what he thought was going to be his last ever match at the Australian Open. This is an incredible story, and it's kind of a fitting end to his career. Whatever happens from this point forward, it's like one of those comebacks that is probably the exact characteristic that we will remember Andy Murray of.
Yeah, like Andy Murray, it's an incredible story. Like 3 years ago, he sat in an interview in the Australian Open in tears, thinking that was going to be his last appearance in the Australian Open. And here he is today, coming back from winning 5-set match against Basilashvili. Incredible player. He's got a great history in the game. You know, he's won so many Grand Slams. He will be remembered for that fighting spirit. So as you said, like, this is a fitting end to his career, regardless of what happens next. It's just fantastic to see him out there and competing at that high level again.
How far can he go? What kind of a season can he have, do you think, realistically?
Yeah, I mean, it all depends. I guess he's got a metal hip now, so he's like the Iron Man. It's kind of hard to know how that's going to hold up. I mean, he certainly has the grit and the determination to get to see him through the season. Everyone would love to see him, obviously, in Wimbledon, especially the Brits being his home surface. And like, I think that going forward, you know, it's a tough, long season. It's very physical. The surfaces, there's 5-set matches. It's going to be hard to see him through the end of the season, but I hope we can see him through the next 4 Grand Slams anyway.
Which of the surfaces is the hardest to play on, just on a purely physical level?
I'd say the clay court is probably the most difficult surface to play on. The ball bounces higher on a clay court surface, so therefore the rallies are going to be lasting longer. There's going to be less winners, because normally on a fast surface such as grass courts, the points are shorter. You know, they might last 6 to 8 shots, whereas on a clay court they could be lasting anywhere between 12 and 24 shots. So a clay court is definitely more physical on the body, and matches last longer on that surface.
So for a guy with a metal hip, it almost is Wimbledon, which is his best chance of doing something bordering on the special.
Definitely, especially if you look at his career anyway in Roland Garros, which is the French Open. He hasn't had as much success as he has in the other 3 Grand Slams, like the US Open, Wimbledon and Australian Open.
And what's the difference in the surface between Australia and, say, the US? Are they similar enough? Is there a significant difference in them? Why have we seen Djokovic, for example, completely dominant here, but less dominant to a certain extent in the US Open?
Well, I wonder, is that got to do with the surfaces? Firstly, to answer your question, the surfaces are the same in the Australian Open and the US Open, but one of the differences is that, like, the Australian Open is the first Grand Slam of the year, so a lot of the players are coming in fresh, having had some time off and an off season, whereas the US Open is the last tournament of the year, Grand Slam of the year. So they've played a lot of tennis in the legs up until that point. So, and especially Djokovic, with how successful he is, he's lasting to the business end of every tournament nearly. So by come the US Open, maybe he's a little bit more fatigued. That could be one way of looking at it.
And in terms of the recovery time from the matches, because we obviously see them play 3-set matches in the women's and then 5. What does the body feel like after going the full distance in one of those matches, and how quickly do you feel like you're ready to go again?
Well, having played on the women's tour, we play the best 3 sets, and you see the men play the best of 5. I mean, that's definitely more grueling on the body. There is a day in between each match, so you get a day off in between each match to allow for a little bit of recovery. So you'll see the players in that situation, and in the back rooms of these tournaments, they'll have ice baths, there'll be physios on hand. So there's a lot of that, like stuff that goes on in the background on those days off. So it's not as much about the practice, it's more about the recuperation and recovery to get ready for the next game.
And do they genuinely recover? Like, do you feel as the tournament goes on, or, you know, even just from your own practice, like, that actually 1, 3, 5, 7, you can play at the same level on those days, that the science is good enough now that you can actually recover properly?
Well, yes and no, because I mean, in the beginning, the first matches you play, you've got that kind of pre-match nerves. You play the match, you know, the tournament started. You want to get a bit of momentum. So then you think, though, by match 3, like so round 3, you're a little bit more fatigued. You start feeling in the legs, but also you want to play your way into a tournament. So there's those 2 ways of looking at it. But come the end of a tournament, your adrenaline gets you over the edge. You don't feel any aches and pains really until you shake hands at the end of a match or at the end of a tournament, win or lose. Then everything starts to hurt a lot more.
Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Djokovic not going to be there in terms of the actual tournament itself. Was he automatically your favourite to win this, given that he is at the end of his career? No matter what happens, he could very realistically be competitive for the next 3 or 4 seasons. We know that from how long Federer has lasted, but that we were beginning to see players not be intimidated by the fact that they were up against Djokovic on the other side of the court. We were beginning to see players push him and occasionally beat him in big matches in Grand Slams. Not that often, I have to say, obviously, but there was definitely proper competition for him. Did you, if he'd had his visa, did you think he was going to win this tournament?
I would still have put my money on Djokovic to win the event or got into the final at least. I mean, he is definitely still at the top of the game. He's on level with Federer and Nadal on 20 Grand Slam wins. And I think he's really gunning for that 21st Grand Slam victory and also to create history by doing that. As you said there, I think he definitely has another 3 to 4 years in him to play. Like we used to have the big four of Roger Federer, Nadal, Murray and Djokovic. You see now those kind of players are not so much at the forefront of the game. And now we have this new next gen top four, but Djokovic is still involved in those. So that includes Zverev of Germany, Tsitsipas of Greece, Djokovic and Medvedev of Russia. So you see he's still at the forefront of the game. I still would have thought because he is so determined to get that 21st Grand Slam that he would push on, because he'd be going for his 10th Australian Grand Slam victory, which is just incredible. But as you said, some of the other players like the likes of Medvedev beat him in the US Open final last year. So there are players coming through and beating him.
Have you, or is there like a general kind of logic out there about those three in terms of Zverev, Medvedev and Tsitsipas, about who is actually going to be the one from that trio who could emerge and be a Djokovic type in this generation?
Looking at the results in the last few years, I think Medvedev is more likely to be the next, number one. He's number 2 in the world at the moment. He had a fantastic season last year, winning the US Open at the end of the year and the year-end event, which is the top 8 players. He also beat Djokovic in the final of that. So he's coming in on great form, having had a great year last year. He has the game as well. He's got a huge serve, and he's also then dictating play with his forehand. So he's got this cannon of a forehand. He's able to hit winners from every area of the court. He's also very physical and can move very well around the court. I think he's definitely a name to look out for in the next few years.
What about Nadal? He's in the tournament. Is it too late for him? Is the days of Nadal winning these tournaments, is that gone? Or like, again, we shouldn't write him off for the French, but it looks like he's definitely on the final few holes of his career.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think after taking off 6 months last year after the French Open to recover from a foot injury, his chances, as you said, other than the French Open, may not be as high as they used to be. He can never ride off such a champion. Like, he has 20 Grand Slams under his belt, but he's facing a tough draw in the Australian Open here. If he gets to the quarterfinal, he'd be playing against Zverev, who's the number 3 ranked player in the world. So, he's got a tough task if he is to get over the line. He's only won the Australian Open 3 times before. So, well, only 3 times, but it's not his best surface on a hard court either. And it's very physical and grueling over in Australia.
What about the women's draw? Because Ash Barty, we were talking last week about the normal pre-tournament hype, and Australia would have been agog about the fact that they have a number 1, they have a favourite in Ash Barty, but for the Djokovic saga. And so it's been somewhat overshadowed a little bit locally, which may be no bad thing in terms of the level of hype that she's facing. But how do you expect Ash Barty to do? And does she have the game to bear the burden of home favouritism?
Yeah, so that's a topic of conversation in a lot of her interviews, has been around, the pressure of playing at a home tournament. But she seems to relish it and looks very relaxed coming into this tournament. She won an event in Adelaide a week ago. She seems to be a fan of playing in front of her home crowd. She's also, again, had an incredible year last year. She's been the world number 1 for the last 3 years. Definitely has the game to play on the hard courts in Australia. She's got this fantastic kick serve, which really affects the women in terms of where they're having to contact the ball. They're playing the ball a little bit higher, whereas most women like to play it around hip height and they like to play up close to the baseline. She pushes the opponents back a lot more. She's able to use a lot of variety in her game. She uses the backhand slice incredibly well, which takes the opponent opponents out of their rhythm. I definitely have my money on Ash Barty to win the Australian Open this year, although there are a few other good players up and coming as well that could push her this year.
Who do you think?
I think the likes of Garbine Muguruza, she's the number 3 ranked player. She's had a great season last year as well. She's also beat Barty last year. She's definitely one to look out for. I think Osaka is back, and she's the defending champion from last year. However, she did take 4 months off last year, so hasn't been playing as much, had COVID at Christmas, so may not be had her form, but I still think you can't rule out, like, she's a 4-time Grand Slam champion, Osaka, and she looked incredibly comfortable out there yesterday playing in her first round game.
The Emma Raducanu story obviously is one that is force-fed us through the British media. Every single thing that happens with her is now front page news on the Telegraph every day. And look, justifiably so, because you come from nowhere to win the US Open. You're obviously going to be a huge story. The stuff that's happened since has been interesting to watch. You know, a change of coach and not playing that much, really, not getting out there and just kind of seeing exactly where your game is at. So what are your level of expectations for her, both for this tournament and really for the rest of the year?
I mean, Raducanu is a fantastic tennis player. Like, her results last year in Wimbledon and the US Open, to come from, you know, qualifying and win and not even drop a set in the US Open was just amazing. She has a fantastic game, a great serve, a very good all-round player, a super athlete around the court. She moves very well. I think that, like that, the media have really hyped her up. She's only 19, so she's become this global superstar overnight, and that definitely has to have an impact on her, because it's very difficult to just transition from playing on the ITF circuit, which is the level below the main circuit, which is all what we see now on the Grand Slams, to then just be the talking point of every tournament. Coming into the Australian Open, she hasn't played as much. She said she switched coach. She had COVID as well over the Christmas break, and she got a hammering last week in one of the warm-up events in Sydney, losing 6-love, 6-1 to Rybakina of Kazakhstan. So, you know, she's not coming in with huge confidence. However, she's a great player, but she's meeting a fellow US Open champion in Sloane Stephens in the first round. So it's going to be a battle of the hard hitters out there today. But for the rest of the season, I definitely think with time, she's going to grow and develop into possibly top 10, maybe number 1 ranked female tennis player in the world.
All right, okay. We're living obviously in the post-Serena era, really. And is there a trend emerging in terms of the style of what's coming? Is there have people taken as much as they possibly can without obviously having the physical attributes of Serena in terms of the power game? Or is there a change and an evolution in how the best women are going to play?
We've definitely seen an evolution of the women's game over even the last 40 years, up until the Williams era. Like, before that, the games like with Graf and Navratilova, it would have been a lot of serve and volley and chip, and the rallies wouldn't have been lasting as long. Whereas since the Williams came along, they brought along this very powerful game with big serves and big ground strokes. But even since then, we've now seen that the ladies' game has evolved into more skillful. The players have really become more athletic. There's a lot more speed and endurance required. You need to be a more all-rounded athlete now on the tennis court, rather than just this hard-hitting player. So if we look, for example, at Williams with her huge serve that she has, like 120-mile-an-hour serve, and really powerful ground strokes, versus Ash Barty, who's now the world number 1. She plays with a lot of style, a lot of flair. She uses the slice. She mixes up her spin. She can come to the net. So there's a lot more variety in the women's game, especially in the last 10 years, which is really exciting for the future prospects of the game.
This is probably something that we're not going to ever get an answer to, but is the variety, or will the variety reach such a level that it would have been able to withstand even Serena at her very best? Would it have been able to grab a couple of Grand Slams here and there, or is it just a natural evolution and nothing could ever have stopped what Serena did in the game?
Well, I think that people had to try to evolve their game because Williams were so dominant. So they had to try to be more creative and have a little bit more flair about them. And when you're playing somebody who plays with such power and plays so close to the baseline, you, as a player, you have to try to take them out of their rhythm and out of their comfort zone. So if you try to play back a powerful game, they're going to beat you. You're playing them at their own game. So because of that, then there had to be a change in the game. So I think now that has definitely helped create that more variety in the game, where players are having to develop different slices and spin and touch and drop shots, to counteract that power-based game.
So you're saying you're picking Ash Barty to win the women's?
Yes, money's on Ash Barty and Medvedev for the men.